We've had a chance to fly the ParkZone Albatros, and Kurt, let's just jump right into the review.
Let's get right to the meat and potatoes, Rob.
We can talk about the flight rather than talk about it beforehand, like we always do, and spoil everything. Model characteristics, build as advertised. I build it, I'll score it. It's just the way it is.
No,
All right, don't argue.
Claim your ground.
4 out of 5. 4 out of 5. As I mentioned before, there's not a lot to this kit. The biggest thing you're going to have to watch on this, and this sounds silly because we've never really talked about this, but I'm noticing it more and more in kits from all the manufacturers. The screws are extremely hard to get in. And the way to combat that is don't attempt to drill the pilot hole any bigger. Leave everything the way it is from the factory. But go through your collection of screwdrivers.
Get a better hammer. Get a better screwdriver.
Pretty much. Get a better screwdriver. Yep. Go through your collection of screwdrivers and make sure that the head is seating into that, the tip of the screwdriver seating into the head as best as it possibly can, because the problem you find out with a lot of these kits is you can't put a lot of force against the screw because there's nothing there.
You're going to crush it.
Yeah, you're going to end up busting something, or you're going to end up crushing something, and these screws will start out fine, but as they seat in about the last 5 or 6 turns, they just get extremely tight and your head starts chattering on the screwdriver. So make sure that you're using the right heads, the right screwdriver. And within like a number 2 screwdriver class, there are many variations.
Line up 4 or 5 manufacturers. Every one of their number 2 screwdrivers will fit the screw head differently. So
if you need to go out and get a screwdriver or a couple tips or something for an interchangeable, it's worth it, because you're going to end up really getting frustrated trying to get the screws to seat in, especially on the smaller ones.
Yeah.
Because you're limited on the grip and everything else on a real small screwdriver. Yep. So that's really the only thing I have with the build as advertised. Everything else went according to plan. Just follow the directions. The landing gear, they've got a specific way they want you to put it in. Follow it. Don't try to change it, and you'll be fine. Finish, we gave it a 4 out of 5. 4.5 out of 5, excuse me.
Yeah,
it speaks for itself.
It's a beautiful paint job on it. We still have the challenge, and I think all manufacturers seem to still have the challenge of, which is just the nature of the beast, getting a sticker to stick to foam that's got a lot of texture to the surface.
It doesn't get a lot of air under it when it's being applied.
So you got to go through and poke them with a pin or whatever. And flatten them out. But other than that, there's tons of beautiful scale detail. The painting on all the little panels and the hinge points and stuff like that.
Well, the engine alone, you look at that, and it's just they've gone way above and beyond what a lot of manufacturers have done with the engine. So it's a very sharp plane. It definitely gets a lot of attention when you've got it out the field. Power, 5 out of 5. Kurt, you and I have flown so many planes that could have had the power backed off them just a little bit or didn't need that much power.
Right. Well, in scale planes, if you're flying a scale replica plane, what's the obsession with flying it like a 3D plane?
Exactly.
I just don't quite get it. I mean, everybody has their own personal preference. They want to do certain things. If you want some really killer high-speed passes and stuff, but if you look at a World War II plane, this is an Albatros you're flying.
World War I plane.
Excuse me, World War I plane.
Yeah, that's all right.
Man.
Yeah.
I just migrate right back to it. This is a World War I biplane. It didn't go ripping through the air at 250 miles an hour. Yeah. The real thing didn't.
No.
I mean, these were old, slow planes that had a lot of limitations to the way they flew. So when you take this as a scale replica, it performed so far beyond that original envelope. Why not enjoy flying it on the wing a little bit? Why not enjoying it more prototype?
Yep.
But if you don't want to, then you can do some crazy climb, hammerheads and wing overs and all that stuff. It has plenty of power to do that.
Yep.
On the power, we did notice that between 50% and 100%, there isn't a huge difference.
No.
So even though you're applying more current to the motor, or the more current is available to the motor, either the way it's propped or the way it's set up, it really didn't need it.
No.
So you did notice an increase. Don't get me wrong. There's an increase in RPM. But when you're actually up in the air flying,
you don't feel it.
It's not a huge difference between half and throttle. With that said, you can fly this thing all day long at just less than half throttle. It has plenty of power.
What I noticed was when I was flying it, I came out of a high banking turn, and a lot of times you'll come down at that angle and then hit the throttle and do a quick low pass over the field. And I did that, and it's like
same speed.
There was it
comes
came
out
out
of
of the curve and it just
going,
kept going. Yeah, it's like, wow, this is. Not that I was disappointed with it. I just expected to see that surge in power.
Exactly.
Because you could hear it in the motor.
If
but
anything, that's going to smooth out people's flying as well by not having that real jumpy response at that half to full throttle. But it's just a characteristic. By no means did it mean the power plant fell undersized or
no, it's perfect in my opinion. And my level of perfect is, we won't get into that. Let's get into ground handling. We're going to give it an overall score of 4.5. we'll break that down into two parts. With the skid on the back, the non-steerable tail wheel, it goes to a 3.5. Now, that is just characteristic of a skid, on a plane. But when you get into bigger planes, what you'll notice right away is that you get rudder authority a lot faster than you do on smaller planes because you've got a bigger prop. There's more wind going over that tailplane. So as soon as this thing lifts off the ground, the tail does, you've got plenty of authority to direct it where you need it to go.
Yeah, ultimately. Now, with that said, if you look at the Albatros design, it's a very small rudder.
It is a small rudder.
It isn't, top to bottom fuselage rudder, and it's all over top of the horizontal stabilizer. So you get that prop wash, it pulls the tail up a little bit. You just got to do some throttle management and some rudder, some hard rudder corrections, and you'll get it to come around for you. But it's not the easiest with the skid on by any means.
But with the skid on is what you want when you're doing grass.
Well,
for sure. Your tail wheel won't really do you much good, and you don't want to put the skid on a hard surface. You're just going to grind it off. It's just plastic. So. But like we said, 4.5 with the tail wheel, I mean, it drives.
The other half of ground handling then is bringing it into
touchdown.
Oh,
sure. Yeah, getting into ground effect.
And that also, when we looked at the characteristics of the plane, it's a biplane. We know they tend to want to tip over on their nose a little quicker. They are very short coupled comparatively to a monoplane. And the behavior of the Albatros coming in entering into ground effect and touching down is very graceful.
Oh, it's
very
consistent.
It's beautiful to bring in. But when you bring it in, you have to bring it in like a tail dragger biplane. You bring it in and you touch it down on the mains, you ride the mains out a little bit, and then you set the tail down.
You got it.
Which means you're going to have to be able to manage that elevator.
Yep.
And it goes beyond the skills of what we've seen. And we're seeing a kind of a growing trend, and we keep talking about this, but people just don't learn how to land. They're not comfortable with their landing techniques.
No.
They drive it into the ground or stall it out, and it hits, and they say if it's broken and walk away, it was a good landing. So you got to land this plane.
Yeah.
If you don't, it's going to end up on its nose.
Well, this is one of those deals where you can call yourself an RC pilot or an accomplished RC pilot. Flying a plane is probably the easiest thing you'll do with an RC plane. Once it's up in the air and you're flying, that's the easy part.
The planes typically can fly themselves, generally speaking. Yeah.
Now, takeoff, sure, most planes are going to want to take off themselves, but to be a fully rounded pilot, you've got to master your landings.
So there it is.
You really do. I mean, that's my opinion anyhow, because the plane's got to come down. Yeah. You can either bring it home in pieces or you can bring it home one piece.
And I think if you shortcut the landings, I think you're missing some of the most enjoyable aspects of flight.
Definitely.
I mean, not to say
some of the most challenging aspects of flight also.
If you enjoy a good challenge and you really like to put your skills on the table when you bring the plane in, especially with a more difficult lander, not to say the Albatros is, but it has its characteristics, you learn how to land.
Yeah.
You're going to enjoy it a lot more. It's going to be much more control. And it's going to look scale.
Well, and it's funny because when we get compliments on the flight itself, it's usually because of the landing. And we're not bragging. It's just people won't say, "Wow, you did a good job of flying."
They won't say a word while you're flying.
No,
or
it's
afterwards
always
about
what
the
an
flight,
awesome landing.
Man, what a landing! I think that's
we've made it a priority to learn how to bring them back.
Yeah,
I may not be the best pilot in the air, but I can bring it home.
We've got to put him on a bench without a bunch of CA dribbled all over him.
Exactly. Oh, that's funny. That jumps us right into durability, speaking of all that. 4.5 out of 5.
You got some big plastic struts and stuff. I mean,
you got a pretty stout landing gear.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty tough. And the blunt nose of the Albatros itself.
Exactly. And the motor itself is not a hard, rigid plastic. It's more of a rubber molded. So, it takes some bumps and bruises. All right, moving on to pilot experience. Flight As Advertised. We gave it a 5 out of 5. Now, we've already alluded to the fact of the flight characteristics, obviously.
Power perspective, from a ground handling perspective.
But, for me personally, when I took the plane up in the air, now one thing the Albatros doesn't have is dihedral. Okay, now normally, typically with a plane that doesn't, you see that usually reserved for aerobatic planes, no dihedral. All right, so anybody not familiar with that, if you're just truly a beginner just watching the videos, without dihedral, what you'll find is when you go into a turn, it wants to slip real easy. It won't self-correct. When you come out of that turn and put the controls back to neutral, a dihedral plane will want to settle in. A non-dihedral plane is not going to settle because naturally there's nothing for it to settle into. It doesn't have that V shape that it wants to.
Yeah, dihedral is when the wings have a tip up at the tips.
So I fully expected this to be having a lot of slip in the turn. I just did. And what was the first thing we noticed?
It's characteristic of a biplane period is you get some decent slip. It didn't.
It didn't. It locked in and we needed very little up elevation.
If there's anything really unique about the flying characteristics that's worth mentioning, I think it's that. It's
Yeah.
the lack of slip and turns
Yeah.
to a pretty significant degree.
Yeah.
And it just makes it that much more enjoyable to fly.
It did.
So
It did
was,
because it took,
I had fun flying.
It took an element out of it that you normally are used to. Automatically, the first thing you do when you go into a turn is a little up elevator. You just expect it.
Exactly.
And you give it up elevator here, and all it's going to do is climb in that turn.
Yeah, I mean, you still have to do a little bit of elevator
Yeah,
management
but-
as you work your way through the bank, but you don't have to get on it immediately. And you
Not at
expect
all.
that, and I think really you're going into the bank a little bit. You have to put a little bit of elevator because there's no dihedral.
Yeah.
It's the fact that you don't have to touch the rudder.
Yeah.
You're not on that rudder immediately to try to keep that turn flat
You got it.
and come around. It's like, oh, wow, I can apply rudder if I want to and really go for a scale look, or I can just let it turn itself around in the bank.
Yeah.
I mean,
Anytime you fly a new plane, you have a positive surprise. That's always a good thing.
oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Negative surprises are usually
And that
bad
was, I
days.
guess, the best way to put it. We had 0 negative surprises,
Yep.
and we did have some major positive surprises.
Yeah.
And to fly a scale-looking plane, they always look great in the air, but you know how it typically is. The
Sure.
more prototype it is,
The harder they
more
are to fly.
real prototype characteristics
Yeah.
come into the RC model. This flew so well.
It did.
might
It
as well
was-
have been just somebody's foam creation that was built to fly.
Yeah.
It was a blast to fly, and it looked great in the air
Oh, it
too.
looked
So
awesome.
you had both aspects of it. I had the most fun that day when we were doing all the review flying the Albatros, because not only did it fly well, but it also looked good. And
It
had
looked
everybody's
good,
head
yeah.
snapping at the field too.
Yeah, and
which
it's
is
just when
fun.
you get done flying a plane and it's just you feel that good about it. That's what it's about.
Yep.
It's enjoyable. Flight time, we gave it a 5 out of 5. Now we did our some calculations with the battery and the run time, and the motor was pulling 20.5 amps at max. That was with the 1800 milliamp 3-cell battery. That gives us 5.3 minutes. Now these are strictly calculations, folks. This isn't taking into account of anything else it can change at, but
Yep.
5.3 minutes at full power,
Yep.
7 minutes at climb out, and 10.5 at cruise. And to be honest with you, Kurt, I think those numbers would be fairly accurate in this situation because we got an easy 10 minutes out of this flight.
Yeah, if you look at your power plant, you look at your thrust with your prop setup, that's going to determine what cruise is. Is cruise half throttle? Is cruise 3/4 throttle? What's that point where you can maintain slight elevation or climbing and descent, banks and turns without having to mess with the throttle? Our cruise was just below 50%. So you drug that runtime out that much further.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to field size. We're going to go with a medium park or flying field. This doesn't require a tremendous amount of room, but it's not something you want to fly at your local park when there's a lot of people around.
Not really, no.
It is considered a park flyer, but just use your own judgment. Common sense goes along with that park flyer.
And you're going to want a lot of landing space because you're going
Yeah.
to want to have to get used to running it out on the mains
Yeah.
and then setting the tail down if you don't want to be stalling it and popping it over on its nose. And
Definitely. Portability, 5 out of 5. I've transported this thing several times since we've gotten it, and it's not a big deal. You stick it up on its nose in the back seat of a car, or if your truck's
very well behaved.
Yeah, I got a back seat. It's
And that's
fine.
sometimes biplanes, especially like this, actually help because you get that much more wing surface to take any pressure of leaning it up on its nose and tilt it over. So.
They don't want to bend. All right, that leaves us last but not least skill level. Now, Kurt and I have talked about this for a little while, and we have come up with the skill level is intermediate to advanced. And the reason we picked that level, the flying of the plane itself is not a problem. Intermediate skills you can easily go out there and enjoy this all day long. Where we tipped into the advanced was on the landing. And Kurt, go ahead and explain what our procedure was quickly as to what the landing was.
Yeah,
it's a throttle management along with elevator management.
Right. It's getting into your glide slope, entering your flare, and proper throttle management through the process. And very quickly, and this translates over to again typical biplanes. When you're coming in and you get into your glide slope, your glide slope is meant to bleed off speed.
Yes.
And I think people kind of forget that. They think it's just meant to bring down altitude.
Yeah.
To get them lower to the ground. Well, you can get low to the ground pretty quick. The hard part's that speed.
Exactly.
You can shoot yourself to the ground, but then all of a sudden you just fling past the runway. You want to consistently bring the speed down, get into your, enter your glide slope, bring your speed down, and then as you go through and transition from your glide slope to your flare, we know that tractor configurations, tractor meaning the power plant's up front is pulling the plane. With tractor designs, you can do so much for pitch control off that motor alone. So instead of having to, constantly work through the flare with your elevator and try to get it down and get it to settle down, take advantage of that power plant, that'll actually reduce your speed even more on approach and on landing. And then what that means is as you come in and your wheels start to touch down, it's not a bad thing at that point because you've already bled off the majority of the speed to go ahead and just touch the throttle forward slightly. And that's going to help keep the nose up. It's going to help reduce that speed even more as the wheels make contact on the ground. And it's also going to keep positive prop wash across your elevator to be able to decide when you want to bring that tail down. So it's a great way, and it's a great experience, but that's where your intermediate to advanced come in. If you really want to land this consistently, it's truly the higher end of intermediate piloting skills.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you know, I mean, getting it up in the air and not crashing it is the mid-level of beginner. So
exactly,
you know, people I think they're more advanced because they have bigger planes or faster planes. But the fact is, their skills are somewhere around basic.
Yeah.
They haven't really mastered a lot of 4-channel effective control and altitude loss avoidance, proper approach and glide slope and flare. That's truly what an intermediate pilot needs to master. Yeah. And then advanced is back up in the air doing crazy aerobatics and stuff like that.
So, or handling airframes that you just require
are extremely problematic.
Or reaction times that the average pilot doesn't have.
And this is a great way for somebody to advance their intermediate skills.
Yeah. Well, it's a scale plane. They did a great job of capturing a scale outline. It flies like a scale plane, and it needs to be landed like a scale plane. It's that simple. You can't just drive this thing into the ground, drop it, flop it on its nose, and call it a good day.
Yep.
You can if that's what you're into, but if you want to really enjoy the whole flight experience, you've got to understand how to land it with the resistance of the grass on the wheels, wanting to nose it over and all that. So,
I agree. Well, that wraps up our review of the ParkZone Albatros DVa. You can go to our website to see the full review at tobefly.com. For our mobile users, you can go to rcflightsource.com, download the mobile app, and take our content on the go. I'm Kurt with Two Brothers Hobby.
And I'm Rob. Thanks for watching.